I shouldn't be fucking telling you people this personal shit. Like, I don't even know you. We can keep it amongst ourselves, can we? Yeah.
Welcome to Ireland Unfiltered. I'm introducing a show that didn't take place in this studio. It is our live show we did in Derry with Mr. Joe Brolly. It was an extraordinary night in an incredible city. An interview I've heard a lot of from Joe Brolly. We all know Joe Brolly for what he is, for the various contradictions that make up his personality. But I'd never really heard him speak like this before on so many different subjects. We talked about the North, about Brexit, about Derry, about his own childhood, about the emotional impact of his kidney donation. And we talked about his time at RTE, which he loved for so long and which gave him so much, but which now seems to have ended in a way that he isn't happy about. Now, we contacted RTE after the interview and they said they weren't going to comment beyond pointing out that Joe Brolly remains under contract at RTE. But it was a fascinating interview with one of Ireland's most interesting men.
Sound, Joe? You're very welcome.
Sitting down here, it reminds me today of the great story about Jerry Doherty, the Guildhall bomber. And a lot of people tried to bomb the Guildhall, and they drove in bin lorries and all sorts, but Jerry bombed the Guildhall. I mean, he took it down. And he was caught then, which is another proud Derry tradition. He then, as the world turns, he then was released and he became a Sinn Féin councillor. And his maiden speech was in the Guildhall. And I think it's the greatest opening line of any speech ever. He said, "The last time I stood on this stage, I quite literally brought the house down."
Well, on that note, you're very welcome. Yeah. You're in Derry quite a lot, though.
Well, it sums up the anarchy of Derry City, and the sense of not taking itself very seriously.
Was that always there?
Well, I suppose it was really, and you could see that with the civil rights, and then the way it very quickly became a no-go area, and then they very fearlessly took on the armoured cars and tanks and guns, and it was always throughout all of that there was always a very black sense of humour here.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember whenever Barney McFadden died. Barney was the sacristan in St. Eugene's Cathedral, and he was from Donegal. And his last act, his son told me before he died, was to put the fixtures for the upcoming National Football League, Derry were going well at the time, on the fridge with a magnet, and had a heart attack. And Barney was a tremendous man. He was a youth worker. He wanted the youngsters to work, and he could see the problem of poverty and what it really meant. And he wanted them to be involved in the JOE, because of course the city was very soccer. And whenever he died, Martin McGuinness told a great story. Martin's brother Tom, you wouldn't know this obviously, being a Free Stater, but we had a coach at Queen's, and every time he went over the border, he would say, "Look out, they're the bastards that deserted you in 1921." Tom, Martin's brother, played midfield for Derry and was one of the, a footballer of great artistry, really, and won 2 Ulster Championships with Derry, and very unlucky not to win a National League title. And they were beaten by Kerry by a point in Croke Park one day. And so Martin was a good player himself, but Martin told the story at Barney's funeral. He gave the oration, and he said, that shortly after the Troubles had really started to kick off here, Martin was very young at the time, and he said, there was a bit of an incident, he said, and things didn't go that well, using that type of language, things didn't go that well. And we were in the bogside in the middle of the night, and we had to dump whatever we had on us and run. And he said the only place I could think of, because I couldn't go home, was I ran to Barney McFadden and Roisin's house, God rest him, in the gasworks where they lived. And he said I ran there in a panic, and the house was in darkness, and I threw a stone at the upstairs window. And after a minute, Barney appeared in his pyjamas, and he opened the window, and he said, "Who is it?" And I said, "It's Martin McGuinness." And he said, "What do you want?" And he said, "I need help, Mr. McFadden." And Barney said, "Indeed, and I will not help you. Didn't I get you a trial for the Derry Miners and you didn't turn up?" And closed the window.
How well did you know McGuinness?
Oh, well, I knew Martin for a long time,
Yeah.
Martin used to be a visitor at our house when he was a young man, and I remember Martin, my mother putting a false beard on him, and he was I think as I recall, the story was that he was going to university. He was my older brother, and he was driven across the border,
Right. And what was happening?
to UCD.
Right.
Well, I couldn't possibly answer.
you can't now, Joe. It's safe.
That was beyond my pay grade. I was only about 6 or 7. But he was a very, Martin's very. I've always had great affection for Martin, and whenever I gave the kidney, you see, Martin was very taken by that, and he invited me up to Stormont to meet himself and Peter Robinson, and it was clear that Martin had a profound impact on Peter, because Peter was really a very, raw, primitive, uneducated loyalist from a very small sort of nuclear community where he had no real experience of the outside world. And what's funny about that? No, but that was true. He was a clerk, Peter was a clerk, and would had very little experience, and was used to all that, all that stuff that you hear them, all that Arlene Foster stuff, and all. You'd be like, oh, for fuck's sake, woman, would you get a grip of yourself? There's a bigger world out here. And Peter had been like that, but Martin, as he did with Paisley, because of his emotional intelligence, you could see that this had had a profound effect on Peter. And Peter, I think, had a lot of, I don't know, and it doesn't matter to me, person's personal life, it's irrelevant. I'm not a paragon of virtue. But it was clear that he had a lot of stresses and strains and problems. And as I got to know them then, it was clear that Martin was a huge support for Peter during all of that time. And Peter had very strongly come around to that whole idea of a secular society and, all of that.
How much do you think we miss McGuinness now then?
Well, it's hard to say because, there was an opportunity here at the time of the peace process. I have the privilege of being very well educated and, going to Trinity and experiencing all sorts of influences that brought me out of myself, because I was reared and Dungiven. And, as far as we were concerned, it was them and us. So, what was the question again?
How much do you think? Oh yeah, but when I ask a question, it ruins your flow. I should just let you talk. How much do you think he's missed right now?
Well, I think that the point I was going to make was at the time in the peace process, we did have an opportunity to have a pluralist society here. We could have attracted money from all over the world. If the Green and Orange had gotten together, we could really have created a society that, that would have dealt with a lot of the problems that we have. There would have been a huge influx of American money, of European Union money. Our public services could have gone up. We could have built a much more civilized society. But, it was always going to come to this, because in the end, the DUP is about narrow self-interest. And it's all like, fuck me. Look, I went to the, you boys wouldn't believe it, I went up to the health committee when we were trying to push a new organ donation system in the north, which actually happened very successfully, as it turned out. And I was at the health committee to talk about that and to answer questions from, the minister and from, everyone who was on the health committee from the various parties. And Jim Wells who was the Minister for Health, introduced me as the Londonderry footballer who brought the Sam Maguire to the United Kingdom. And he kept saying that, like, he's like, what fucking age are you? You know. Well, you have some, and one of the, I can't remember the other way, Fraser or whatever his name was, you know, this type of thing. He says, well, you have some cheek showing your face around here after what your family was responsible for. You know, oh, fuck off, sir, would you? So the possibilities, and particularly when Peter Robinson was destroyed by the loonies, you know, because they really are like fucking banning gay blood and the homophobia and, you know, the way they talk about an Irish Language Act, you know, basic stuff, just a wee bit of mutual, like an Irish Language Act wasn't going to hurt anybody, you know. It's like, great, yeah, it's great, it's good, of course, sign up to that, yeah. You know, bit of goodwill, and instead now, you know, we're in that situation where there's that sort of triumphalist sneering all the time, and eventually it has its impact, and we see, you know, that the Tories were using them for a while, and in spite of the fact that the vast amount of damage that would be done in the very unlikely event of Brexit would be to those poverty-stricken unionist areas.
Why do you say the very unlikely event of Brexit? Well,
I mean, I could never see it happening.
Really?
I don't see it. Well, I mean, can you see any clear route to it?
No, but I don't know.
I mean, it makes no sense.
Well, unless there's an election.
Yeah, but even then, what's going to happen? If there's an election, I mean, it's... I suppose you could get into that scenario where, because of course we're in the era of the charismatic charlatan, you know, people like Boris Johnson, like, I mean, and you know, this idea of, you know, and I saw this thing in Channel 4 last week, and I was interviewing these critters in working men's clubs up in the most poverty-stricken areas of England, saying, you know, it's time we got out of Europe. I mean, Jesus, do they have any idea what's in store when we get out of Europe? In terms of public funds, in terms of the deficit, you know, and this idea that, you know, and they're all saying that Boris is doing a great job, you know. And you're back to that sort of magical thinking, you know, that people like Hitler or Stalin or, you know, people like Oswald Mosley were peddling, you know, great demagogues, you know, your problems are because of...
the other.
Yeah, you know, that type of thing. And... so, I mean, I can't see any clear route to Brexit.
But do you think the DUP's proximity to that power has sort of, you know, twisted their minds?
I don't think the DUP care about other people. I don't think that, you know, people like Sammy Wilson or Gregory Campbell have any concern for their fellow man, you know. And, you know, I mean, I was in Queen's for 6 months when Arlene was there. I'd come back up from Trinity. And she was in the same class as I was.
Really?
And I always found it extraordinary that she was perpetually enraged. I mean, I never saw her that she wasn't enraged.
By what?
Just everything. I mean, she was just enraged, you know. And if she wasn't enraged, she was sneering, you know. And I mean, I have nothing against Arlie. I don't know anything about the woman, you know. But
I suppose she would say she had a bit of trauma in her own life too, and it probably
here, listen,
her, you know?
Get in the queue. Yeah. Get in the queue. Everybody's got a sad story. I mean, pick a person out here who doesn't have a sad story, who doesn't have tragedy in their lives. I mean, that's part of the human condition. It's not an excuse for being I don't think I could say that word even online. But it's not an excuse for that level of antipathy for your fellow man. I mean, you take a drive up the Shankill Road, and you see the poverty there. I mean, and I've been involved in some regeneration projects in Belfast, and the neglect in those Protestant communities is a disgrace. And the answer to it is, you know, it's the Queen's birthday or it's the Queen Mother's birthday, and we'll celebrate that. And it's, you know, and I mean, is it any wonder that the Loyalist paramilitaries, once the violence had been turned off, rejected the DUP and rejected all of that nonsense? You know, that demagoguery and that empty politic, which is entirely self-serving and doesn't do anything for anybody. I mean, the raison d'etre of the DUP, unfortunately, is to get elected. And they're good at it, and it's a simple, primitive message that they peddle out there.
But you say like
I said to Gregory Campbell one day at the up at the Belfast Festival, I says to him, Gregory, I take it that most of that stuff you're saying, on telly and all, I take it you're not serious about that. He says, you could see him, like. I said, really? Like, you actually mean that stuff? Genuinely? But maybe he does.
But if Brexit isn't happening, has it unleashed that stuff again? Though it's just fizzed up the cocktail a bit too much. Even if it never happens, the damage is done in the meantime is quite extreme.
Well, no, I think that because of what went before, people are. I think that in Derry, for example, or in Belfast, you see this as well. We understand that. Like, you're talking about a sceptical nationalist population, if you could call it that. It's a pity that we have to talk about nationalist and loyalist in this day and age, because in truth, they're just distractions that distract you from the main issues that are facing society. Poverty, tax evasion, running down of public services, the cheapening of the important jobs in society like teachers and ambulance men, all the people who do the work. The fact that our best and brightest kids now are going into jobs where the sole purpose of that is to effectively exploit your fellow man. All of the real issues that affect us, climate change, all those things, these are the real issues. And you get, they're still talking about flags. Fuck me, like, flags.
When you were growing up in Dungiven, did you have a more atavistic, more basic view of the world then?
Well, the troubles were sort of in their way exciting, and we just, the TV license man, he got his van burned out, and I was like, fucking brilliant, did you have the TV license? He was fucking bad, fuck off and don't come back, And very quickly the town became a no-go area. They put a Christmas tree. The Limavady Council came in and put a Christmas tree in, and all the light bulbs were taken off it, and then it was just burned. It was like, fucking you black bastards,
Fuck Christmas.
Yeah, fuck you, and then of course, you had the paratroopers and all, and you see, we were only children, and we had the JOE, so we had a community, a nuclear community. And then once the internment started and all, and like, remember my old boys movements were uncertain. And I remember, one time, my mother was a school teacher from Coal Island, and where she wouldn't have come from a Republican background or anything, she's very, I don't know how really you'd describe her, but she was extraordinary in her way, and unbelievably courageous and, tough, like. And anyway, we were only children, and this will give you a sort of a flavour of what it was like. I only tell you it for that reason. We were coming in, and we were, as I recall, it was like a green Lada. We used to buy Ladas off Brenton Campbell in Coal Island. We had an orange Lada, then we had a green Lada. We were always extremely patriotic in our choice of car colours. And so we're coming in from primary school, and I was maybe about 6. And I don't know where my father was at the time, but he hadn't been about for a wee while anyway. And my 2 younger brothers were there. So it was 3 of us, one after the other. And my mother was allowed, because there were no childminders or anything in those days, so they were just allowed to come out to school. Maybe Connell, the youngest, was coming out just to be minded out at school. So anyway, we were coming in the main Derry road, because the school's about 2 miles out, St. Given, hot day, I recall, and there was a queue of traffic, and the cops were stopping, and the Brits were there as well, you see. They were all, in those days, it was a very different thing. Young people wouldn't believe how spectacularly successful the peace process has been. So anyway, they're all there, you see, all gunned up, and we're there, and the cop says to, young cop, he says to me, mother, he says, could you take the keys out of the ignition and step out of the, could you take the keys out of the ignition and step out of the car there, love? And my mother said, no, I won't. Just look at there, and she's got these eyes, that flash like, no, I won't, she said. She was a school teacher. She said, no, I won't. He said, just step out of the fucking car. He said to her, take the fucking keys. No, I won't. I'm here with my children, you see. And we were sitting, she had rolled up the window and locked the doors. we're sitting there maybe 2-3 minutes, and now it's becoming a problem because it's the traffic on the main Derry road and all it. And then people are looking and they're seeing this is a woman, and there's kids in the car. They're starting to get out of the cars, and now the army are getting tense, and you can see the guns are coming out, and people are saying, "Fucking let her go," and tooting the horns and all that. And the wee cop said to my mother, he said, "We know all about your husband." And she said to him, and she used his name. "That's funny," she said, "Constable. He knows all about you too." And you could just see the blood draining from his face. Because they were shooting him in the face then. Cops are coming out, and, these were all, I have devoted my life to the saving of human life and the preservation of human life. And I have no doubt that those formative experiences were very important in that regard. So when Martin McGuinness died, Sinn Féin were heavily critical of me because I said what I thought was a very honest appraisal of Martin and a very affectionate appraisal of Martin. I said, I cannot forgive the impersonal taking of human life, the impersonal ordering of assassination or whatever. But in any event, my mother said that to him, and you could just see him, fuck, and he just let her go. And I'm sure that would have had an impact on him, but that's what was going on. And
but what the impact that had on you? Because you were the eldest.
Yeah, well, the house was we were kept away from anything, really. And I remember young people just wouldn't believe internment and things like that. You see, the British Empire was a very cruel thing, and they were used to just doing whatever they wanted all over the globe. And you see the vestiges of that in Brexit and all, that contempt for other people and that sort of, that old Etonian sort of, sending the Irish, that type of shit, we shall attack here, and here, sending the Irish.
Why isn't he called Murphy like all the rest of them?
Well, exactly. Aye. So anyway, I can remember they came in and we were all regularly turfed out of the beds and all that, and just one day they just came and they took him, and there was no trial or anything, and there was no interview, and we didn't know what had happened. He was taken to Long Kesh, and that was it. We went in to visit him every now and again. You were never told anything. He was just interned. He was kept for 3 years. We were only kids, and then one day there was a knock on the front door, and big guy Don Semple, who had the shop next door, he had a phone. He says, "Anne, you have to go and pick up Francie at Long Kesh. She's waiting for you." That's it. That was the information you got, And you see that in Bloody Sunday and in the things like the Ballymurphy massacre and all, where they just target practice on the paddy, fuck them. And that total disregard for human life. And I don't blame the squaddies. I don't know if you saw that documentary recently about what the squaddies who were here went through, the terrible post-traumatic stress and the culture of drug taking and all when they arrived home into the barracks in the evening alive. It was a horrific situation for everybody involved. But it was caused by that imperialist mentality, and that, all shit that's got nothing to do with how human beings ought to live their lives.
But you said you got away from it by kind of retreating into a world of your imagination and by reading and with the GEA as well.
I'm not so absolutely sure about that. We you see, because everybody was part of it and it was no big deal. So when my old fella was away, you had full support of the community. There was no sense that you were that you were at a deficit, that you were at a disadvantage because of this. And it was very much just a part of who we were. It was them and us, and it was going to go to the death. I mean, my uncle Ewan, my father's younger brother, he suffered terribly on the Dirty protest. And he was there for 5 years. And, he got his hip smashed and his shoulder smashed. I remember when he came out and they never got washed properly. They got hosed with disinfectant and stuff every now and again. But his hair was to here, and it was gleaming. You could have seen my recollection is you could see your reflection in it because he hadn't had his hair washed for years. And he was on the Dirty protest and they were just beaten systematically. Imagine you wouldn't do that to Imagine if you did that to dogs or something, and RT had one of those primetime documentaries where some bucko hides a wee camera in his shirt. He says, fuck, did you see what's happening in that dog's home? You know, and these guys were living infested with maggots, you know, dying of pneumonia. And they're in the middle of it. Eamon McDermott, reading the classics from a tiny volume of the classics that they'd smuggled in the block at night. You know, a very good friend of mine. I made Eamon a millionaire, I'll tell you that story. He'll thank me for telling that story. Declaiming the classics at night, you could hear a pin drop. You know, they had nothing. They had no tellies. There was nothing in their cells.
And have you talked to your father about those times? Like, have you asked him?
He's a very secretive guy, you know. Yeah. You know, he's like Paddy the Irishman on Mastermind from Crossmaglen. You know that story. So he's, you know, specialist subject is the troubles in Northern Ireland, you know, and the activities of the British Army in South Armagh between 1970 and 1978, you know. And your first question, where was Robert Nairac buried past? Which IRA unit were involved in the assassination of the soldiers at Bestbrook? You know, past. Somebody shouted, "Fair fucks to you, Paddy, tell them fuck all." Yeah. So you know, my father would have been very typical of that. You know, he was a classics scholar himself in St. Columns, you know, highly educated and thoughtful and all of that, and would never have been, you know, in other circumstances this would never have occurred. But Bernadette Devlin, you know, one of the greatest, most blistering personalities I ever met. She said, you know, she was out in America and they were giving her, you know, the tour of New York and all. You know, Bernadette. Do you know Bernadette? No. Ah, fuck. Yeah, you know, she's just extraordinary in every way, you know. She runs a well woman's centre now in Cookstown and all. But she was gorgeous and she organised the riots here and all, and she was out of this world. And anyway, and she famously slapped Reginald Maudling, the Home Secretary, after Bloody Sunday. She was the youngest MP in history at that stage, I think. I think she was maybe the youngest. But anyway, Reginald Maudling was making one of these, you know, statements about it, you know, just making up lies, you know. They are fired on by provisional IRA operatives from a number of locations, here, and here, this type of thing, you see. And Bernadette came down behind him and slapped him in the face in the House of Commons and was dragged out of the House of Commons. I mean, an extraordinary woman. But she said, well, if somebody, she was asked about the troubles on the Johnny Carson show, I think it was. She says, well, if somebody punches you in the face, you'll punch them back. And that's what happened, really, you know. That was our take on it. You know, there's no reason for us to become involved in that sort of thing unless it was forced upon you. And that's really what happened.
But then the GAA was the thing then that kept you kind of going, and Dungiven GAA initially.
It was a great connection, you see, because you could go down south and you were just part of, you know, and this was a sense of community. I mean, and increasingly with the demise of the church and all of that, and, you know, the way they've destroyed what was a brilliant idea in the New Testament, you know, this idea of love for your fellow man, regardless of who he is or who she is, you know, and empathy, all those brilliant ideas that were in the New Testament, you know, destroyed, of course, by money and avarice and greed and, you know, sexual predilection, all the problems that have afflicted the Catholic Church, you know, in its hierarchy. But with that gone, the GAA is the only thing that replaces it. And the starting point for any civilized society is community, a sense of community, for its own sake and for the sake of prosperity, and a sense of empathy with your fellow man. And we see elsewhere in the world, I mean, England's now a nation of strangers. You know, the spirit of togetherness and community that was prevalent. I think the 2 world wars destroyed that, you know, but they're now just a nation of consumers like America. You know, it's fuck you, like, you know, every man's on his own. What we still have here, and which is why I evangelize so strongly about the GAA, is that the GAA, the starting point of community is, I know you, I don't know you, but I know you. You know. So I gave a kidney to a guy, I didn't know who he was, but he was a GAA man. And he had kids who played GAA. That was good enough for me. Community. And so that's why I evangelize for the GAA.
Tell me about the Dungiven Ballinderry match in 1982.
How would you even know about that? Mixing around. You're of too sensitive a disposition to hear about it.
I go on, try me.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Dungiven and Ballinderry. What happened was Ballinderry were an unbelievably violent and successful Gaelic football team, and they had the whole linchpin of their strategy was violence. And they were like some fearsome ice hockey team, and the only way to Dungiven decided after years of being under the thumb, and I mean a lot of the Derry clubs were under the thumb, and Gaelic football was tough then, obviously. Dungiven decided in the 1982 county final that they would lay down a marker that this would not be tolerated, and Dungiven had some unbelievably powerful men too. But there's a great story about the first game, and I only heard it last year. So the first game was a draw, and the second game was abandoned. But in the second game, or maybe it was the first game, but it was like an amphitheatre really, because I'd played in the under-16 final before that for Dungiven, and it was so exciting and scary as well because these guys meant business. And in the first game, the Dungiven keeper, after about 10 minutes, John Summers, who was a very clean player of the ball, and he was also the Ulster and Derry goalkeeper. Ball came in high, you see, and Adrian McGuckin drove him into the back of the net from Ballinderry as he caught it. You were allowed in those days to do that, but he gave him an awful slap, you see, and John was poleaxed. And as Adrian was getting up, Liam Murphy, Dungiven's fullback, a great fella, Liam hit him with a huge uppercut. You could see coming a mile away, and Adrian just straight down, you see, face down, completely knocked out. And in the melee that followed, Christy Grieve from Dungiven got his leg broken. And so he had his leg broken. Adrian's lying in the goals and can't be moved. They had to ring for an ambulance. So there's about a 15-minute delay, and there's sparring going on all over the pitch. And then the ambulance came out onto the pitch, you see, that took the two boys away. And I tell you this story. About 2 years ago, I went to see Liam Murphy. Liam was recovered. He was getting cancer treatment, and thankfully he's great now. And he's great fun, he's just a great fella. And he was there with Mary McAleese's husband, the president, Martin McAleese, you see. And Martin and Liam had been in Queens together and lived in Rostrevor until Martin moved away after Mary became so successful and all that. So anyway, they were there in the hospital, and Liam says, "Brolly, did I ever tell you the story about what happened when the two boys were put into the ambulance?" And I says, "No." And he said, Eugene Hassan, who was Dungiven's number 6, and one of the most powerful men I've ever encountered, a tremendous looking fellow, he's like Captain America, and never says very much, would not be talkative one bit. And Murphy says, so they were putting the two boys into the ambulance, you see, and Hassan was standing beside it, and they were just about to close the ambulance doors, and Hassan said, "Boys, do you not think you should wait until you have a full load?" Yeah. So the second game was abandoned anyway, and then nobody was awarded the county title, but honour was served. Yeah. But I mean, football was habitually violent like that in those days. So I'll slow that man up, And see, I was lucky because the Dungiven team was very, very powerful. Boys like Brian McGilligan and that, and who really was like Brian. Brian hit Jack Sheedy one time in Croke Park in Dublin, and Brian was just like, he really was like stone, and he was unbelievably quick. He was like a horse. And they didn't realise that, opposing midfielders. You have a split second to make your mind up about whether I can get to that ball safely or not. And Sheedy was very statuesque. He had a big waist up to about there. I think it was an All-Ireland semi-final. And Sheedy took off to get it. He thought he could get it, and McGilligan hit him, boom. It was proper, and you could hear it everywhere, and up he goes into the air anyway, and the crowd went, "Oh!" And he's lying on the ground, you see him. Anyway, I met him sometime later, and I says, "Jeez, that's an awful slap McGilligan," out in New York. I said, "That's an awful slap McGilligan gave you." He says, "Joe," he says, "I couldn't sleep." He said, "I couldn't eat, I couldn't fucking do anything." He says, eventually, he says, went to the hospital. He says, "Oh yeah, they diagnosed me with severe whiplash injuries." Yeah. That stuff used to be okay,
And would you have thought it was, like, if you were a pundit then, would you have thought that was okay?
It was just normal,
Yeah. But you've always been very critical of what other people would consider normal now, though.
But that's, you know, society has changed, you know. I mean, you'd never see, you know, fist fighting and stuff in school anymore to settle disputes. I mean, whenever I was a kid in school, like, every dispute was settled with a fist fight.
Yeah.
You know, boys were going changing their shoes, getting somebody else's shoes that had, you know, steel toe caps in them, and all that type of thing.
So when I read that your father told you to get out of Dungiven and go to Trinity, is that right?
I think that's right. You know, everybody was going to Queen's, but I was keen to get away myself. I mean, I went away when I was 11. I was sent to boarding school in Armagh, and you know, that was,
at 11.
To be honest, I enjoyed it. Like, I was,
really?
yeah. I mean, it was, you know.
Why? What did you want to get away?
Well, just, you know, you're. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote at the end of The Great Gatsby, you know, so we beat on boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. And I found that from about the age of 40 onwards, that increasingly my mind was, or my self was being taken over by, you know, haunted by the past, sort of, you know.
What do you mean?
Well, you know,
what you were seeing.
Just when we were young and all that.
Because you said you don't have any relationship with your parents at all. You said that recently.
Well, you know, I'm trying. Put it that way. I'm trying. You know, it was these, and I hadn't been. I think that what I had done was just shut it all out and say, look, everything's great. And then, you know, very quickly people were saying, fuck, this guy can play football, like, you know. I was playing basketball for Ireland, you know. Fuck, this guy can run a courtroom trial like nobody's business, you know. And so everything I touched was like publicly. Yeah. Publicly, everything I touched was a success.
But that void was there.
Well, I mean, you're not conscious of it. And then eventually it came to me. And after I gave the kidney, you know, that it was like an opening up. Like, I mean, I'd be standing in the shower, like, the tears were running down my face. I said, what the fuck is going on here? You know, and it was very forcible. It was very forcible like that. But St. Pat's Armagh for me was a haven, like, even though it was anarchic beyond belief. I mean, we were at St. Pat's Armagh. I was there about 2 days. And it was old school. Old school. Like, the seniors dispensed discipline with the teachers. And myself and this boy Tommy McChrystal from Berra, a wee weedy guy who was awful homesick. Oh Jesus, he hated it, you know. And it was prison for some of the lads, but for me it was freedom. And I loved the whole anarchy of it, you know, the feel of fuck. And anyway, me and McChrystal were just grabbed by seniors. We didn't know who they were, and we were brought up into the senior common room and just thrown into the floor in the middle of them. They were spitting on us, like, wee fuckers, who's fucking coming in here? Fucking boss. Fucking show them what we do to fucking coming in here. And they had this guy who was squealing. They had a dartboard and darts, and they had this guy, and one of the seniors, and they were holding him by his arms and his legs. And this guy, as in a quirk of fate, I met him when I was in Trinity then. He was a senior in Trinity, a boy called Gaby Graham. He looked like a loyalist paramilitary. He wore sunglasses all the time, even inside. Anyway, he says, he fucking show you what you do, wee bastards that fucking mess around with us. You seen he was smoking, you know. And, right, go on ahead, lads, he said. And they fired a dart into this guy's leg, and he was screaming. Then they fired another dart, and Tommy started crying, and I thought, I'm going to put a brave face in this, but this is not good. This is not a good situation. They threw 4 darts into his leg, and then they just dropped him onto the floor, and he was screaming. And they said, tell your friends what you've seen in here today. And about 4 or 5 days later, we discovered the guy had a wooden leg. That's true. A guy called John Toll, he had a fucking wooden leg, and it was a proper wooden leg, like Long John Silver. Because sometime after that, he became a prefect in our dorm, and the toenails were painted. It was fucking weird. None of these sort of, you know, Oscar Pistorius style, you know, oh yeah, I'll just go out for a jog, yeah. So I mean that, and so St. Pat's Armagh for me was a release, and I revelled in the freedom and the anarchy of it, and never really went back home again, because I went on to Trinity then after that. And
so when you say you're trying,
the only reason I came back to Derry was the football.
Yeah.
Because we were on to something. And that was really, for me, I was first and foremost, I was a dreamer.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
and were you an extrovert? Like, were you an extrovert when you were a kid? Because like all the blowing kisses to the crowd and stuff.
Well, I think that sort of came on, you know, and it wasn't. First and foremost, I was a dreamer. You know, and then obviously as a child, once you're, you know, people say, oh, sing a song, or, you know, I was in the musicals and all that, or do this or do that, you know, and you could do it. And then you were getting rewarded, you were like a dog. You know, do the wee trick, great, oh, look at that. And it was superficial like that, but the football wasn't superficial.
Right.
You know, the football was something for me. I loved everything about it, the feel of the ball, the grass, the speed. I was a flying machine. You know, you fuck, and the crowd were like, oh, fuck. You know, and you could feel it, and my head was just full of, I remember as a child standing out in the garden, an empty garden in the morning, you know, before anybody was up. I was a small child, and I had Michael O'Hare commentating in my head, you know, the great Kerry commentator, you know, this man from Derry is a ball of fire, like. And I always scored the winning goal, and I always sang the national anthem and stood to attention before I started my training, you know, with the proper respect for the national anthem, you know.
But then when you won the All-Ireland, you said it was
and that happened very quickly. All of a sudden we were the All-Ireland champions.
But you said that was an anticlimax.
Well, because it is.
Yeah, explain that.
It's just a trinket, it's just a thing. It's not your real life.
But you said it was a real thing. You said football was a real thing.
Football was a real thing. I loved football, adored it, and did until I was 42. Kept playing until I was 42. Because the rituals of it and the honesty of it and the, you know, the camaraderie and the collaboration and all the surprises and possibilities and disappointments of the game. You know, the winning of it was an anticlimax.
Did that surprise you when we won
the All Ireland? It did, because I sort of thought, I suppose, a bit like the suicide bombers. You know, I'm going to, you know, have a life now of, you know, sex in heaven. With, you know, there'll be lots of orgies. You know. This is going to be fantastic.
So when you say it was an anticlimax, you mean there weren't enough orgies?
Well, if you want to, on a more serious note, I mean, I've never liked orgies because you never know who to thank at the end of the night. But that idea that there would be some, because you'd seen people winning All Ireland and you thought, wow, you know, this is going to be, and to win it, because for me, I mean, I've not much conscious sort of real, you know, recollection of that campaign. It was just, I mean, I went into the tunnel, and you know that you talk about, sports psychologists talk about being in the moment. I mean, I had no comprehension of crowd or anything else. I mean, I was just in that tunnel, and it came out the other end, and we had won, and then again, and came out, and we'd won the All Ireland. And I was standing in the shower with Fergal McCusker, my great friend, and you know, we're very different personalities, you know. And I said to him, "Is this it? Like, is this all that for this? Like, you know?" And I felt that, you know.
Yeah. And did you think, like, 'cause some people when they get that sensation, Roy Keane or someone
celebrating like mad, and they were going wild.
But like some people,
there's loads of women on the go, and it was all that. And I was just thinking, fuck, what a disappointment all that was. But it was a good lesson for me.
But did you use, in what way?
Well, it was just the superficiality of all that other stuff that goes on around it. You know, the telly and the adulation and all, which is all false, you know, and that's not totally correct, because obviously with us not being a pro sport, you know, and you're part of your community, your Derry thing, and, you know, you're part of that and you're hooked in, and there was all of that, but there was that thing where you thought, you know, you sort of thought in a way that it would be a fantasy finale and like escapism, you know, because I was an escapist, and then you were just like, I was back in court then a few days later, and that's it, it's done. Because
some people have that feeling, like Roy Keane or somebody would have always had that feeling where, you know, he wins something and it never really did it for him, and he'd be back on to win the next thing again. But did you find that...
Because you're always stuck with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, the rest of it's you know.
So you detached from it then, did you? Did you feel that
Well,
winning?
no, I mean, I enjoyed it well as there was a load of drink and crack and all that, but you know, it was time to just get on and go back to court and defend the innocent and cross-examine angry policemen and all the rest of it. And their kids.
And did you feel, like you say you played till you're 42, but I think Kieran McGeeney said to you at one point, or some stage, you'd wasted your talent. Like, was that something you recognised?
No, because I would never have been a professional sports person, because I wouldn't have that, you know, I would get too bored with it quickly, you know, and you know the way professional sports people, like, they always talk about themselves. Fuck me. It's like listening to interviews with actors, you know, tell us about your latest film, you know, what was going through your mind. I don't know about you guys, but that's diazepam for me. Yeah. Or, you know, asking an athlete, you know, listening to that sort of, that whole self thing that comes from professional sport, you know. I mean, I think professional sports are a really unhealthy environment for people, and I think that they're easily lost. And you look at the statistics, you know, drug abuse, alcoholism, all the problems that they have. You know, it's a very, very unhealthy environment. So for me, the GA was great because you were just centred in the community anyway, and you just got on with your job, and everybody was doing the same thing, and you know, it was. So you were doing it voluntarily, and you weren't. Yeah. There was no compulsion or anything like that.
And is that something, because, you know, you've been saying that about the dangers to the GAA of losing that. Do you feel that battle is lost, like, because it's just going...
it's going in the wrong direction. I mean, the problem is that the problem was eloquently summed up by Peter Quinn, who was the last visionary, the last great president of the GAA, who said, look, we're going to have to secure our community. That's the key thing here. It's securing the health of the community. You know, it's the social purpose of the GAA. The games are great, but the purpose of the games is social. It's about community. It's about making sure that nobody's left behind in the community, that the elderly people have someone to look about them, that everybody knows each other. You know, you're not in these horror stories where some old person's found 2 weeks after they fucking died, you know, rotting in a bedroom, you know. And Peter Quinn said whenever he built the new Croke Park, this will pay for our idealism. But as Peter Quinn himself said, you know, I said to him, Peter, what has happened to the GAA? He says, what do you expect from an organisation run by fucking school teachers? That's not a criticism of school teachers. But no other comparable organisation would have volunteer school teachers running it. You know, this is a huge, huge organisation, you know, and what we're seeing is a drift towards professionalism and elitism. And unless you have got a long-term strategy, radical strategy, to prevent that, well, what we see happening now is what's happening, you know, the GPA and all those sorts of things. And it's why I'm very passionately opposed to the GPA and all those professional sort of encroachments on what's happening. Because I can see what's going to happen.
What's going to happen?
Well, sooner or later it'll disintegrate. And once it disintegrates, we wake up some morning, you know, as I wrote last Sunday, we'll be England. I'll give you a simple example. So like a fellow, Stevie Law, rang me recently, Protestant guy, a friend of mine, barrister, and his son was going out to America, and he said, look, he doesn't have a J1, he's going to Manhattan. I've been told that the GA guys can help. I said, great, look, tell him to ring me. Patrick rang me. I said, right, you're a member of the St. Bridget's Club in Belfast. Right, Dublin are going to win 5 in a row this year. Just keep saying that. Yeah, I fancy Dublin for the 5 in a row. Fine, great, he said. So I made a phone call to New York. They met him at the airport. He had a job in a hotel in central Manhattan. I was sent a photograph 2 days after he was there. I was sitting down to his morning fry, thumbs up, all the other staff around him. Yeah. You know, now you're a kid from Manchester or Birmingham and you want to go to New York for a summer and you don't have a J1 visa. Well, good luck to you. You go out there, you traipse around, go to the job agency, you know, go to you know, the rental agency and traipse around looking at flats. Yeah. I mean, you've no chance because they don't know each other. So it's a very precious thing that we have.
But you see, when I hear you talk about the GAA or when you write about it, and it makes me feel bad that I'm not a GAA man. But then when I hear you, the things you say about people who are playing the GAA, I feel quite relieved that I'm not a GAA man. Like, how do you reconcile those two things?
Well, the game's very different now than it was. I mean, the games only reflect the community and what's going on at that particular time. You know, and...
But do you ever feel that you went too far with people who were just, you know, as you say, part of the community?
What way? Like, tell me what you mean.
Well, people you might have said things about, like, you know, when you said that, you know, we could forget about Sean Kavanagh as a man.
Yeah, well,
like,
I mean, it was obvious, it was clear that I was referring to the cynicism and the skullduggery that was coming out of the Tyrone camp. And Sean, that was 3 weekends in a row that he'd done that. And I'd spoken to him personally about it on the phone. So you got to stop this stuff because it's going to spread like wildfire. It's destroying the fabric of the game. You know, that deep-seated sort of cynicism, do whatever it takes to win, regardless. You know, and, you know, that Tyrone team were despised by everyone they played against. I mean, I meet players from the Great Down team and Tyrone team that I played against, and Donegal teams, Tony Boyle, boys like that. I'm invited to Down reunions. Recently I was there, and we share a drink together. And boy, we had some epic battles, like. But there's still that great sense of camaraderie. And, you know, I make no apologies for what I said.
But do you see it?
David Hickey said that after I said that, he was in the bar in Killarney and I got a standing ovation in the bar. but I make no apologies for that.
But is it the part of you
that was about protection of the core values of the game?
Where you say Mayo or celebrity losers, like, is that like?
They have a big problem down there. They have a big problem with that. You know, competitions to take you in a test drive in the new Audi, you know, the Friday before an All-Ireland semi-final. You know, the whole celebrity culture that exists there, and we see it all starting to unravel. Sure, they you know, I have really enjoyed that Mayo team, I have to say, and it's a great county and all the rest of it. But their culture was wrong. I mean, Pat Gilroy came into Dublin, changed the culture, made them part of the community, took them outside themselves. There are more important things in football, and you see that with Jim Gavin's group. They're manning, you know, Brother Kevin's soup kitchen every Thursday night. You know, they're volunteers in the Simon. They get it. Culture is very, very important when it comes to the games. And whereas Mayo were sort of dealt with like a professional team and cocooned and all the sponsorship and all the rest of it, that's fine. There's, you know, but I always felt that there were people there who were more interested in that than they were in the business on the field. They weren't connected enough to their county and for what they needed to be doing. You know, you have a duty. Like, that's what we felt whenever we were playing for Derry to win in All Ireland. That we have a duty for everybody who's gone before and everybody who's to come. We're capable of doing this, so let's do this. Let's do this. You know, I mean, my father's still on the oil tank. He wrote Derry for Sam 1993 beforehand, and it's still there. He repaints it every year. He's 83. Derry for Sam 1993. Be a long fucking time before we win it again.
But it's not, when you said earlier about, you know, the part of you when you were a kid that was performing and getting the plaudits for singing a song, or that you know, that it appealed to you, that part of you. That's not what you're channeling when you're on television and you're saying the things that get a reaction.
No. I mean, one of the problems with RT now, for example, is that, you know, the head of sport who's come in was the head of news previously in RT, and, you know, we get a memo to say, look, we want to be more like Sky, you know, which I put in the bin. And
you put the memo in the bin? Yeah,
and we bring in TV screens and all that, and now we've become statistical heavy, you know. You're getting, you know, it's like being a politician now, getting the buzzing in your phone, comes and say, oh, Cork have had a 35.7 productivity rating in the first 15 minutes of the game. Right? You know, you're encouraged to read this stuff out. You imagine standing over at the bar and saying, Jesus, was that interesting that Cork had a 35.7 productivity rating in the first 10 minutes of the game? You know, and there's that culture of fear now with RTE, that culture of, you know, the blander the better. And in fact, what's happening now is it's all becoming script-based, where really what they need are newsreaders, not people who are expressing an opinion. And Gaelic games are different from professional sport. You know, this isn't professors of chess on a BBC 4 at 2 o'clock in the morning analysing a recent World Championship chess game, for the anoraks. I mean, I'm conscious when I'm sitting in the studio that they're elderly farmers from Belmullet. Their mothers with young kids. They're young kids watching as well. The GA is far bigger than just a game. It's what we love. It's our recreation. It's what we want to relax to and enjoy. And vigorous debate. If punditry is to mean anything, it's vigorous debate and honestly expressing your opinion. And RT used to be fearless in that regard. When I started out, Glenn Callan was the head of sport. Glenn used to say, you're here because you're here, and we never saw the head of sport. Now it's very, very different. I mean, I got a warning. You couldn't make this stuff up. It said at 11 minutes past 3 on the day of the drawn All-Ireland final, you said to Pat Spillane, it was put in quotes, "Would you stop patting my arm? This was grossly unprofessional and rude and cannot be tolerated." I kid you not.
You got a warning?
Yeah. I was also told that Joanne Cantwell had lost confidence in my abilities as an analyst.
Really?
I know. What do you say?
Are you finished
It
with
wouldn't be my place. It really wouldn't.
That was in the warning. You got that in a
Well, but that was the sort of thing, and you could see that very quickly the ground was, shrinking. And that idea of the bigger debate, that was not a good place to be. Stay away from that. Keep it bland. Just go through the script. I mean, we got a script before the drawn All-Ireland final. A script. We want you to do this, and this is what we want you to talk about. And I said, look, I rang up and said, look, you need a narrator, you need a newsreader. There's really no point in me because I'm not interested in that stuff. And it was a pity because, I feel that something very important is being lost now. And there's a culture of fear there.
Why is the culture of fear? Where's it coming from?
Because unless the line is toed now, it's increasingly script-based and increasingly bland.
But what are they frightened of?
Well, you see, it's an irrational fear nowadays. This balance is a big thing. Like, I'll give you a simple example. I know that guy, James O'Brien in LBC, he's a great guy. He's written a book about how balance has paralysed progress in society. Because you have got to give the loony exactly the same platform as you give a person who's logical. So you've got to give Boris Johnson, if you're in the BBC, you've got to say, right, regardless of how nonsensical it all is, and we all know that it is, you've got to say, well, that's what do you have to say about that to the other person, you see? And it's a disease of balance that eventually paralyzes real discourse, and it then becomes difficult to know, what's true and what isn't true. We see that in American society very strongly. But I'll give you an example. I was making the point before the during the drawn final before the budget about how important Dublin's culture is. And about that idea, Michael Dara, for example, and a few of the other boys are involved in an inner city regeneration project, and they're part and parcel of their community. And they've got empathy, and they're in Brother Kevin's soup kitchen and all the rest of it, and these things are now part and parcel of what they do. And I was saying that, and Joanne Caldwell said to me, well, she said, how do we know the Kerry players aren't involved in charity work as well? I said, what the fuck are you talking about is what I wanted to say. Yeah. But you can't say that, obviously. You don't want to say that sort of. And it's that idea of, you can't say that about Kerry because the entire population of Kerry isn't in the studio. And eventually it just becomes impossible to talk, to freewheel the way we're doing. I mean, the reason I agreed to do this is because I know you guys are grown up, and you can actually talk, You don't have to. And
you said a few years ago that nobody in RTE had ever told you not to say anything. Was that still the case?
No. That was, they would say publicly that they've told you not to say anything. But, and don't get me wrong, I loved RTE. The sense of family that we had. And whenever I started there, all the producers and all the people who've been in, and Colm and Pat and all those guys, the fun that we have had. And, on All-Ireland final more than this year, I was conscious of Michael Lister. So I rang him to see if he was okay and stuff like that. And, if any of us were ever in hospital, or you'd be visited, and there was a great family feel. And you could sense that affection. Garrison Keillor said, the great North American literary giant, he said that, radio and TV, he said, was about false friendship. It was about people sitting in their living room thinking, this is good, I'm enjoying this, And that's what I think RT has. And so, for example, the last All-Ireland final, the 2017 final, Mayo played Dublin, and Sky and RT went head-to-head, obviously, because they were both, there's a simulcast. And in Ireland, 1.2 million watched it on RTE, and 2,000 people watched it on Sky. Which, as I said on telly, that more people went to Mass in Donnybrook that day. And RT didn't like that. But, that it was because of that thing that, that the GA is more important than statistics and the number of hand passes, and it's part of who we are. And that evangelizing, and the bigger issues that we were able to talk about, that was all a no-go, and that was shut down. And sure, what's the point in it then? You're just, it's like the civil service,
Are you done with RTE now?
Yeah, I would think so, yeah. Well, after tonight. Is this like is there going to be an inspection by the clergy? Am I not able to get a pint?
So you think it's done?
Yeah, well,
it
was a personality clash. It was quite clear whenever the new head of sport came in that immediately there was an aggressive approach to me. And, that's fine. I'm a big boy. I had a blast in RT. I loved every minute of it. And I could see, George Orwell wrote a pamphlet in 1941, Politics in the English Language, and how it was going, what a visionary he was. He said that we're going to get to the stage where people are going to be afraid to say anything aside from the cliches that are going to protect people in public life. And he said it's going to infect schools, business, government. Eventually people are going to say nothing, and it's going to be a charter for all sorts of skullduggery, and it's going to be entirely sterile. And how prophetic that was. And it is a pity. It really is a pity. You know what I mean? I travel all over Ireland, as you know, and I would do probably about 50 organ donation events, community events a year in communities. And people say, geez, that's brilliant that you do that. The kick that I get from that, like I was in Clare last weekend, a girl died of cystic fibrosis, Sheila Callan, and it's a very personal thing for me. I get invited to these things, and they say, like, we wanted you to come down, and 12 teams were there of girls playing the tournament, and I met, her fiance, who's still grieving 3 years later, Michal Talty, and his granny, his grandmother and grandfather were there, and the crack that I had with his grandfather, and I'm immediately admitted into that circle, and that sense of community. And that side of things was so important for me on RT. I was able to say, look where I was last weekend, or I want to say to X who's suffering this week, they've lost their daughter. Because one of the things about the organ donation and the cystic fibrosis is that so many of them die. And it's been a great privilege for me to be able to be part of that community and to stand in their shoes and have that empathy. Empathy is the greatest thing. It's the greatest kick you can get.
You've always, it's 7 years next month since you donated the kidney.
It doesn't seem that long.
But would you say, how would you describe Joe Brolly before that and Joe Brolly after that?
Well, I would never describe myself in the first person like that. There's only two people who can describe themselves in the first person: the heavyweight champion of the world and Hugo Duncan, the country and western singer. You cheeky bastard. Fucking do. So, well, I mean, it's difficult to say.
Because you've talked a lot about that as a moment. You said, you found yourself sitting in the shower, tears streaming down your face. You talked about trying to establish a relationship with your parents on the back of it.
It's not for me to say, really. I'm less confused than I was, I think, and more. It's very difficult to say. Because, I mean, I always thought whenever I was reading, I read voraciously. And then I stopped. Like Forrest Gump running across America, and then I just stopped. Yeah. But I mean, I could read 4 books a day, like, and all sorts of books, psychology, psychiatry, I mean, any crap under the sun, like, books about Mozart. but it's very difficult to answer that question, really.
But you said it was something you did, with hindsight, you said it was something you did to atone for the sins of the past. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think that whenever you're in the situation that I was in, and I didn't realize this at the time, I thought, look, I'm doing this, and everybody said, oh, he's a national saint, this is fantastic, and they wrote scholarly articles in the Irish Times about a new era of altruism being ushered in by me, this sort of shit. So anyway, I must tell you a really good story about that. After I gave the kidney, you see, the JA ones are great for keeping your feet in the ground. So if you ever meet like multi-millionaire JA people, they're all just completely down to earth. Whereas if you meet multi-millionaires who aren't, they live in a cocoon and they've got security and all that type of thing, and Range Rovers, and all that. But anyway, after I'd given the kidney, you see, it was a huge thing, and people were sort of shocked, and it was kept very quiet. And actually, it was a solicitor in Derry City, because I couldn't do the case, and I had to tell him at the last minute, Paddy McGurk, and he said, I just want to say to the court that one of our colleagues, Mr. Brolly, is not here today in this case because... So then it went around very quickly. And I'm in the hospital, you see, out in London, because it was complex surgery. And my mother came in, and it was like letters, emails, thousands and thousands and thousands of letters and messages and cards. I mean, thousands and thousands, you see. And anyway, I was home, and I wasn't in great nick, you see, and I was maybe about 2 weeks after I was able to fly home, and I wasn't in great nick. And I'm going through all this, and it's all eulogizing, it was fantastic, it was amazing, I didn't think you were, it was a blah, blah, blah. And then my favourite ever letter, now and again I'd get hate mail, and always says, so-called pundit or so-called barrister, but this was great. And it said, the most deadly of all letter writers, A. Anonymous. Ballintubber, County Mayo, whatever I'd said about Mayo in the Sunday game, you see, 5 or 6 weeks earlier. Obviously, my words were taken out of context, but it said, Dear Joe, it started off like all the other ones, congratulations on your magnificent gesture in donating a kidney to a fellow Gael. Any chance you could donate the other one? Yours sincerely. I literally got one time from a Tyrone person, and it said, it finished off by saying, indeed, it was only a pity. It was whatever I'd said about Tyrone at the television, or Mickey Hart or something, you see, because Mickey's good value for it. Yeah. Because he's very pious and all. Anyway, the letter was, it was a diatribe, and it said it then, indeed, and it was only a pity before the ceasefire was called that you were not put up against a wall and shot. Yours faithfully.
But was it when you were getting all that, when you were getting all those emails, all the good ones, like, was it hard not to believe everything they were saying about you?
No, not at all, because by that stage, it gets real, and once you do that, it gets real. And it's an interesting thing, I've obviously been with a lot of people who've had transplants since and spent time with them, and, would be a very regular visitor at hospitals and all that. And whenever people get opened up, it can have a profound psychological impact as well, and they can find themselves emotional where they weren't before. And there is a part of every human being that's very mysterious, and you've got not much control over. And with me, it opened up the box in those demons, and it, I would imagine it'll be a lifelong process to keep that under control, and to
what do you mean by
try to find the right way to go about your life.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's a constant. See, every night it comes for me, so every night, like I'm an insomniac, and every night, all right, so I met this girl anyway, and it was like, it was a huge thing for me. It was, the Italians call il colpo di fulmine, the thunderbolt, after I'd given the kidney. And it's been a huge thing in my life. And when she's there, I can sleep. I can, you know. But when she's not, you know, every night it comes for me, you know. It's like last night it comes for me. When it gets dark, it's 'cause back from childhood, you know.
Yeah.
We had a through-other house, to say the least, and it would come for me at night, you know. So I had a very careful, controlled routine at night now to deal with it, you know.
What is that?
Well, I'll go downstairs, I'll sit, I'll maybe drink a cup of tea, I'll watch telly for a while, I'll just keep it all under control. I'd be raging in here.
Does it scare you?
Oh yeah, it's like, you know, I would have had nightmares for years and years and years. Like, I mean, whenever I was a child, I got my medical notes and records after I gave the kidney. I shouldn't be fucking telling you people this personal shit. Like, I don't even know you guys. We can keep it amongst ourselves, can't we? Yeah. But I had this thing when I was a child, which I had not even remembered of. It's hysterical blindness, where, you know, I had got this idea that I was blind in the left eye and couldn't see.
Right.
And for about a year, I walked around with my hand over my left eye,
Okay.
not able to see from it.
Yeah.
You know, they couldn't find any organic cause, and sometimes you just don't want to see, maybe. You know.
Are you angry at your parents for what you went through as a child?
No, really not. No, not that.
What is
You
it?
know.
Like, what is the disruption in the relationship with them?
I'm not telling you. Yeah.
But it's not anger. You don't feel like when you say you're working
I'm
on a
angry,
relationship.
yeah, but not for that reasons, you know.
Right. Okay.
But that's it, you know.
Yeah. When you talk about, you said you wouldn't.
I don't want to get into this sort of. One of the other things that interests me about the modern world, you know, is watching, and again, make it clear, I'm not interested in the man's personal life, Boris, and I heard that girl being interviewed yesterday and Boris being interviewed, and who cares if they had sex, fine, you know, it doesn't make any difference to me. I was going to say as long as it was enjoyable, but but the use of language, this sort of language to disguise the truth, and you know, and these masters of skullduggery like Tony Blair and people. I must tell you my Hillary Clinton story actually when I'm thinking about this. But you know, Bill Clinton and people like that who, you know, used that thing that Orwell talked about, that, you know, and it's damaging to the fabric of society, you know, this lying language and using language to lie and to mask your real meaning. And we see that all the time now, you know. I mean, Boris, for example, visiting hospitals every day this last fortnight, like, you know, fuck, I mean, the National Health Service, public services will take an enormous hit in the event of Brexit. And I mean, he knows that, but there he is, you know, shamelessly going around washing his hands and rolling up his sleeves, you know, and going into maternity units, you know. But Bill Clinton and people like that were masters of it. You know, I remember Bill Clinton saying, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, you know. I just came all over her, like, you know. Tony Blair talking about, you know, God, I mean, and I mean, the fucking heights of ludicrousness, you know. Tony Blair had a feng shui expert who came to live in Downing Street, you know. Whenever he met Gerry Adams for the first time, they went out to his back garden, and according to Gerry Adams, they hugged a tree in the back garden. Like, you know, this loss of reason, this retreat from sanity that we see with America, with the UK, and rolling across Europe as well. You know, but anyway, I'll tell you my Hillary Clinton story. It always stuck in my mind that Bill had said, you know, I did not inhale. You see, first of all, he said he never smoked cannabis, like, and then photos emerged of him in Cambridge with a joint in his mouth, and then he said, I did not inhale, you see. And Bill was a complete sociopath, as some of you may know, you know. To establish that he was strong on law and order, he had a lobotomized black man, Ricky Rector. He interrupted his primary campaign because the Republicans were saying he was soft on crime, and he went back to Arkansas, and he personally oversaw Ricky Rector's execution. It's assassination, in effect. Ricky was a mentally ill, very, very mentally ill, brain-damaged black man who'd committed terrible crimes, but he had effectively had a lobotomy, and for his last meal he ordered whatever he ordered plus pecan pie, but he didn't eat the pecan pie, and as the guard said, look, Ricky, you're not eating your pecan pie. He said, I'll eat it when I come back. He said, but you understand you're not coming back? You're yeah, that's fine. He said, I'll have that when I come back. Bill was a sociopath in the real meaning of the word, very manipulative, very dangerous man, sexual predator, all those sorts of things. But anyway, it stuck in my mind that he said I did not inhale, and he says, so anyway, after I gave the kidney, Hillary was coming to launch position herself for her presidential bid and all that. And anyway, Martin said to me, you must come up, she's coming to the Titanic for a big dinner. And I never go to those sorts of things. But I thought I was sore, and I was, I had a lot of wounds and all. I thought, fuck, I'll go down, because I hadn't had a drink or anything. And I thought, I'll go down and just see what it's like. So anyway, I was there, and it was all, Hillary, her massive contribution to the peace process. And to my knowledge, the only thing she ever did was had tea in the Shankle Road Leisure Centre with the women of the Shankle, And everybody was saying, Adams was up saying about her great company. Well, shit, like. And anyway, this was annoying me a bit as well. So I'm sitting down at this table way at the back. And then the Secret Service dudes were all there, all that, all big dudes. And anyway, they said, McGuinness came down to me and he said, I've told Hillary about you and she wants to meet you. And I said, great. And I said, there was a boy, Ryan Feeney, at the table. I needed a witness. I said, come with me, Ryan. You see, can he come too? She said, come on ahead. So up we went anyway. And she was there with the Secret Service ready to go. And McGuinness sort of said, here's the guy. And she said to them, and they just parted like that. And I was there, and she came over to me, give me your hand. She goes, give me your hand. She goes, Martin has told me all about you. Must be a wonderful, wonderful young man. And how are you feeling? I said, to be honest, I said, and I pulled her right into my face like that. I said, and I held her like a vice. I says to her, to be honest, not great. I said, I'm actually bleeding from the wound. I was wondering, could you do me a favour? I said to her. You could just see her thing. And I could see McGuinness going, for fuck's sake. And there was nothing he could do in the Secret Service, because I was being very smiley because I didn't want them to. And I said, could you do me a wee favour? And she said, yes, of course, because I was really gripping her hand. I said, is there any chance that Bill could get me some good weed? And she went, because she knew everybody's looking, she went, wonderful. Yeah. And I never got the fucking weed either.
What's next, Joe? No RTE.
Well, I mean, I have a lot on. I have a lot on. I'm immersed in the games, and I'm immersed in, the whole idea of communitarianism, and obviously I've got the organ donation charity. I would say charity, it's like a...
Pull that into you then.
It's it's just me. It's just a evangelising campaign, but there are 500 sports teams in Ireland wearing Up for Life. And, that's been a huge thing. The North went from the bottom of the European league tables to the number one living donor country in the world. So if you need a kidney, best place in the world to be is the North. And again, that's just community. It's about community. So that the GAA played a huge role in that, because I go around these communities. Ulster Rugby were a big help. Went to the soccer clubs, the Cliftonville, Linfield stuff, all that, Derry City. But primarily, it was the GAA that got the message out there, because you were going to these communities, and now somebody needs a kidney. And I was getting phone calls like from Tim Brown, my good friend, who's the chief surgeon in Belfast City Hospital. Tim's from a very different background than I am, Methody, all that, brilliant guy. And Tim, I brought him to see Cross McGlen playing in the All-Ireland Club semi-final against Castlebar. He just thought it was the best thing he'd ever seen. And then there was a fight at the end of it too. And then we were in the bar afterwards, and this would be Tim, right? So he goes out with, transplant surgeons are all like this. He's got this huge big iPhone. And so we've had a few pints, and he takes his iPhone out, and he's telling some fella from Butler's Bridge, because we stopped in Butler's Bridge on the way back. He's telling some fella about his operation about his transplant operation that morning that he'd done. You'll see here, there's an absolutely spanking ureter. And if you pull that out, you can see just where I've connected it to the fuck's sake. Like. But Tim Brown was agog once all this started about whenever he could see that, say, someone would come in from Burren, County Down, and they would have 6 volunteers from the family to be tested to see whether or not it was suitable. And so now we're doing the same number of living donors in Belfast City Hospital as deceased donors. So it's a huge thing. And for me, it's a small illustration of the power of community, the power of togetherness, the power of empathy, the sort of things that the GA should be doing, you know, systemically. We should have a proper structure, a proper strategy. And, you know, I think the penny's going to have to drop sooner rather than later, because it's a very, very precious thing that we're going to lose otherwise.
Joe, we'll leave it there. Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Brolly. Thanks, Joe.
Well, it's been quite a come down since that night in Derry. It really was a fabulous evening in the Guidor Bar. Thanks to everyone who made that possible, all the crew at Maximum Media who put on such an incredible show, Joe himself, and everyone who showed up that night. It really was a magical night. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to Ireland Unfiltered on all the usual channels. And if you like this show, please leave a review.